Okay, good morning. And I want to talk about this problem that of seeing people as people that I hear mentioned, and I've been accused of not seeing people as people. And I want to go back and give you a little bit of my own background, and I'll give you the background of another writer. Um, on page, there's the book, don't mind the reflection. On page 32, chapter 1 of my first Do Ask, Do Tell book, I write, my parents gave me this one very stern warning that I must never mention the subject of homosexuality again to anyone, for no good reasons other than to shelter the sexual comfort of normal adult men, particularly younger men primed to grow up. That's in the forced intimacy of a dormitory confined space in 1961 we're talking about. And to protect the family and all others constructively associated with me, same-sex attraction and neuroticism deviance would have to stay forever off the table as a mentionable subject. I had settled down now. I no longer felt the pressure to overcome the self-deception and consequent teasing from the dorm mates, so I listened. If I somehow got kicked out of school again over this issue, my college days were over, because no college would ever take me, and I would definitely be doomed to some kind of marginal existence. Okay, and that's how it was. We grew up with the idea that our grades were kind of like a current cryptocurrency in high school, that your grade would determine your future and whether you would be your caste, so to speak, and whether you would wind up in the well off in the management caste, or whether you would wind up as a prole, so to speak, in the proletariat. And I actually while I was in the Army, I wrote an unpublished novel called The Proles that actually published a little bit of that, the Army part of it, in the third book, the 2014 book. But you could, and the other thing that might have contributed to this was I felt very strongly nobody could be erotically interesting to me unless they were pure enough. And if something happened to them, even if it wasn't their own fault, disease or particularly being maimed in, let's say, war, young men, 18 to 25, the draft, being vulnerable to the draft, being vulnerable to be sent in combat, particularly later on in the Vietnam War, until 1973, even if somebody was maimed and disfigured in war, they could no longer be interesting. They were done. That's how I felt. And I never actually stood anybody up in a relationship, in the sense I never deserted anyone, because I never really had a relationship that got far enough that could really happen. But that hypothetically was the risk. And also the thing about in William and Mary, and the issue that came up early in my time there. I think trying to find when I was at Brown Hall in the dorm. I've shown you this picture before. The issue that came up early while I was there, literally in the first 2 weeks, was the fact you were supposed to go to a hazing ceremony called the tribunals, which I simply just skipped out on. And then my roommate mentioned that I'd skipped out on it, but there were some circumstances, some other things going on that kind of deflected from it, and we'll talk about that some other time. So it sort of got swept under the rug. But supposedly, and I did hear that this happened, they would pick out 1 or 2 boys and shave their legs in order to make them experience what they thought was being defiled and feeling feminine, which is a very ironic thing to say today. And that was a totally unacceptable thing. I thought if you let that happen to you, you were done. You were marked and shamed forever if you allowed that to happen to you. And that was the way I thought about things. There were no second chances, and just like there was with grades. And that was, it's a very authoritarian attitude, but it was kind of a common attitude in some ways. But I carried it farther than most people did. Now, what happened then is that during, when I came back to Arlington in the end of November of 1961 and went into therapy with the idea that hopefully I would be able to return to William and Mary in February in the spring semester. That was if a psychiatrist would sign off on it. And in this building here in Arlington, near Route 50, I had an individual therapist, and I think I did mention that stuff about the tribunals to him. I didn't, and that kind of, I think, stuck in his mind and led to this other comment, which I'm kind of showing you here from page 33. Well, if it'll come up, that I don't see people as people. I'll go to the passage in the book. I'll bring up the text in the book. My father told me that therapists had related to him that I was very sick. I remember him saying that, excuse me, I think in January of 1962, before I'd been home very long, before I went back to school at GW. I was very sick. He was lying on the love seat in the den when he said that. He was having a nervous stomach and everything. I think that was before his heart attack, but he was feeling the physical effects of what had happened to me. I didn't want to believe him. Then he said, "You don't see people as people," he charged, "but you see them as foils." Yes, but later on in subsequent family therapy at NIH, he would come to my defense, half praising me for a stickler for definition and accurate, if dangerous, usage of words. Well, of course, we know now that it's changing the definition of words is everything, and that's NIH, that's the clinical center where I would later be hospitalized in the second half of 1962. So I think I've kind of explained the context in which I didn't see people as people. I saw them as sort of instruments or objects in some sort of system which was supposed to be optimized and supposed to be perfected and made pure or something. Now, I'll also point out, again, pardon the reflection, David Hogg's book, Never Again, which he wrote very quickly in the spring of 2018 after that incident at Marjorie Stone Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, near Fort Lauderdale, and I think it's in Broward County. And on page 54, he writes in the paragraph at the bottom of the page, he says, "Stupid as it is, I think it all came down to seeing other people as people. That was the solution to a lot of my problems." In other words, he says, seeing other people as people. "It pushed me face to face with all the suffering in the world, not in an intellectual way where I tried to analyze it from far above, but this time feeling it inside." Then later on page 55, he writes, "Which is really funny, really, because I started out trying to be this super efficient machine of world domination." That's a strange thing to hear from him. "And ended up discovering compassion, and it turned out to be the compassion that made me more efficient. If you want to put it in practical terms, it's as simple as this. You can get a hell lot more done by working with people than working against them. And those people who you think you'd be more productive when you don't have to deal with other humans and their flaws." Did I read that right? And those people who think you're more productive when you don't have to deal with other humans and their flaws, they're just deluded. You have to see your own flaws, or you won't understand the flaws in other people, which means you won't be able to fix yourself or help them with their problems, and that means we'll never be able to fix anything. Now, David led a rally in the summer of June of 1960, June of 2022. It happened to be on Pride Day, where he was talking about when he needed people you know, do things, go visit senators and so forth for him. He had a big rally on the Capitol Mall that day, I still remember. But anyway, I think that that's just a very interesting take on this issue of seeing people as people. So that's the thought I wanted to leave you with today, and we'll develop this topic further later. And thank you for listening.